The sky over Washington, D.C. that night felt heavier than usual, a deep slate-gray blanket pressing down on the city as if the heavens themselves were trying to hide something. A fine mist of rain drifted through the cold air, blurring the sharp lines of the buildings and painting the streets with a liquid sheen. Every droplet seemed to carry a fragment of an untold story, falling silently into the shadows. Street lamps burned dim, their golden halos muted by the weather, as if someone had intentionally turned down the brightness to keep prying eyes away. On a night like this, Barack Obama would normally be somewhere safe and predict a speech, attending a public event, or at home with his family. But tonight was different. There were no cameras, no motorcade, no flashing lights announcing his presence, only a single black sedan gliding quietly through the nearly deserted streets. Rain struck the windshield in soft, steady taps, the rhythm almost in sync with the heartbeat of the man in the back seat. Obama sat still, his gaze fixed beyond the glass, his hand resting on a worn leather-bound notebook that looked far older than any of his recent possessions. There were no typed notes, no prepared statements, only that book, and whatever it contained. Inside the car, the silence was thick. The only sound came from the tires slicing through shallow puddles and a soft hiss of the rain. Half of Obama's face was caught in the faint glow of the streetlights, revealing two stories at once. On one side, the familiar calm and warmth the world had come to know. On the other, a depth of thought that belonged only to those who had carried truths too heavy to speak aloud. Tonight, there was no smile, only a measured stillness, the kind a man wears when he is walking toward something irreversible. The sedan turned sharply onto a side street, gliding past shuttered storefronts and darkened windows until it reached a quiet corner. The building there looked unremarkable, no nameplate, no seal, no guards standing in plain sight. Its brickwork was old, weathered by decades of rain, but the faint amber glow from within hinted at life inside. Few knew its purpose. Fewer still had ever been invited inside. For decades, its walls had swallowed conversations that could never be repeated. The driver eased the car to a stop near a side entrance. Obama glanced briefly out the window. A brass door handle glinted under the dim light, raindrops catching on its surface. Shadows moved faintly inside, not hurried, but deliberate. They wore suits, but not matching ones, as if they didn't belong to the same department or even the same country. Obama slid on a pair of black leather gloves, pushed open the car door, and stepped into the rain without an umbrella. The chill worked its way through his overcoat, but he didn't adjust his stride. Each step was deliberate, evenly timed, as though matching an unseen clock. Reaching the door, he paused for half a second, scanning the dark street behind him. No cameras, no reporters, only an empty alley fading into darkness. Inside, the air felt entirely different, warmer, older, heavier. The wooden floor beneath him creaked faintly with each step, and the walls were lined with portraits of men and women whose names the public might never know. Some were presidents, others military leaders, and a few bore no labels at all. In the corner stood an old brass coat stand, already holding a heavy trench coat that clearly belonged to someone else. Obama slipped off his own overcoat and hung it beside the stranger's. This was not a place for greetings or small talk. Here, everything was recorded, but nothing was ever acknowledged. From the far end of the hall, a figure approached, solidly built man with gray hair, a black tailored suit but no tie. His eyes were sharp, the kind you only saw in people who had spent most of their lives in negotiations that never made the news. He gave the slightest nod, then turned silently. Leading Obama down the corridor. At the hallway's end stood a heavy mahogany door. There was no nameplate, no number, only a thin strip of warm light leaking from the gap beneath it. Obama could hear nothing from inside, not even the rustle of movement. The man stopped, turned to meet his eyes, and for a brief moment, the weight of unspoken words hung between them. The look was a warning. What you hear in there will never leave you. Obama gripped the leather notebook a little tighter, his mind already racing through the possibilities. Then, with a steady breath, he reached for the handle. The rain outside seemed to pause, as though the entire city had drawn in a breath with him. Slowly he pushed the door open. Warm, amber light spilled out, carrying with it the faint scent of old wood, paper, and aged whiskey. Inside, figures sat waiting, their faces caught between the glow of table lamps and the shadows at the room's edges. Every pair of eyes was fixed on him, not in surprise, but as if they had been waiting for this exact moment. No one spoke. Yet in that silence, the air thrummed with expectation. This was not just another meeting. Something in this room could alter the story the world thought it knew, and Obama had just stepped into it. The door eased shut behind him with a soft, deliberate click, sealing the warmth of the room and shutting out the rain's faint whisper. The air inside was thick, saturated with the scent of aged paper, polished wood, and a hint of cigar smoke that lingered like a ghost from an earlier time. The low amber lighting cast deep shadows in the corners, hiding as much as it revealed. A long mahogany table stretched across the room. At its far end sat 3 men and 1 woman, each in dark suits, their expressions carved from stone. They didn't rise to greet him. They didn't need to. Their eyes followed him with the kind of stillness that speaks louder than words. Obama stepped forward slowly, each footfall muffled against the thick Persian rug. The notebook in his hand felt heavier now, almost alive with the weight of what it carried. His fingertips grazed the table's edge as he reached the open chair. He did not sit immediately. He let the silence stretch, listening to the quiet, the hum of the overhead lamp, the faint shifting of someone's sleeve. Finally, the woman spoke, her voice low and steady. "We don't have much time." Her words seemed to cut through the air like a blade. One of the men slid a slim, black folder toward Obama. Its cover was unmarked, no labels, no seals, but the edges were frayed as if it had passed through many hands before arriving here. "This," the man said quietly, "is why you're here." Obama rested the notebook on the table and laid his palm flat against the folder. For a moment, he simply stared at it, the faint texture of the paper rough beneath his fingertips. In the silence, he could hear the distant drip of rainwater against the building's stone facade. His breathing slowed. He opened the folder, taut photographs, grainy black and white, a place he did not immediately recognize until he saw the second image. His brows tightened, almost imperceptibly. The woman's gaze stayed fixed on him, watching for the smallest reaction. "You understand what these mean?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he flipped another page. Documents, followed typed reports, faded stamps, redacted lines like black scars across the paper, dates that didn't align, names that shouldn't have been there. When he finally looked up, his voice was calm, almost too calm. "If this is true," he paused, the weight of the sentence pressing on his chest, "then everything changes." No one in the room moved. The man, seated closest, leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped. "It's already changing. That's why we called you." The rain outside grew heavier, its rhythm tapping against the window like an anxious heartbeat. Somewhere in the building, a floorboard creaked, followed by faint footsteps retreating into the distance. Obama closed the folder but kept his hand on it. He studied each face around the table, his gaze lingering just long enough to remind them. He had learned long ago how to read people who spoke less than they revealed. "If this comes out," he said quietly, "you know what happens." The woman nodded once. "That's why you're the only one we can trust to decide if it ever does." Silence. Again, the kind that pulls the air from a room. Somewhere deep inside him, he knew this was not a decision he could walk away from. Obama kept his hand on the folder for a long moment, as though by holding it shut he could keep its contents from changing the world outside. But the weight of the eyes around the table and the faint hum of the overhead lamp pulled him forward. Slowly, he opened it again. The first image was of a map, not a modern one, but yellowed with age, its edges torn and brittle. It wasn't the geography that struck him, it was the marks. Circles, lines, dates, locations that shouldn't have meant anything, yet did. The second photograph was clearer. It showed a group of men in dark coats, standing on the steps of a building that looked eerily familiar, except the photo was dated decades before that building was supposed to exist. Their faces were blurred by the grain, but the shape of one man's profile. Obama's hand froze on the page. His breath caught, not out of fear, but recognition. The woman's voice broke the silence, her tone a fraction softer. "You see it, don't you?" He didn't answer. The next page was worse. Typed documents, but not in English. Margins filled with notes in black ink, handwriting so precise it looked mechanical. Stamps from agencies that officially did not exist. Then, a single photograph, color this time, far more recent. It was taken only months ago. A handshake, a face he knew well, one that the entire world trusted. Standing with a man whose name had been erased from history books. Obama closed his eyes for a moment. The rain outside grew harder, each drop smacking against the glass like the ticking of a clock running out. When he opened them again, his voice was steady, but quieter than before. "If this comes to light, it won't just rewrite the last 50 years, it will destroy them." The man closest to him leaned in. "We're not asking you to expose it. We're asking you to decide if it ever should be." The words landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples through the air. Somewhere in the building, a door slammed, distant but sharp enough to draw every head for a fraction of a second. When their eyes returned to him, Obama had already closed the folder and slid it an inch away from himself. "What you've given me isn't just information," he said. "It's a weapon, and weapons can't be unmade." The woman folded her hands. "Then you understand the cost of both choices." Obama sat back in his chair, his gaze shifting toward the rain-streaked window. Outside, the city lights blurred into streaks of gold and white, smudged by the storm. Somewhere out there, people walked under umbrellas, unaware that in this room, the course of their future was being weighed in absolute silence. He did not give them his answer that night. Instead, he rose slowly, taking the black folder in one hand and his leather-bound notebook in the other. "I'll give you my decision when I'm certain the world is ready for it." And with that, he walked toward the door, the sound of his footsteps echoing softly in the long hallway, each one pulling the truth further into the shadows. The conference hall was quiet now, emptied of its earlier chaos, but the echoes still lingered in the air like smoke after a fire. Barack Obama sat alone at the long wooden table, his fingers tracing the edge of a notepad without writing anything. The meeting earlier had been intense, heated words, cautious glances, the weight of unspoken truths pressing on every participant. They had been so close, painfully close, to shaping a decision that could have altered the course of history. Yet, in the end, the room had fractured under the pressure of politics, fear, and the invisible chains of obligation. Outside, rain tapped against the tall windows in slow, rhythmic beats, each drop magnifying the silence within. Obama leaned back, his gaze fixed not on the paper in front of him but on the ghost of what could have been. He thought of the faces he'd seen today, some tense with resistance, others illuminated with hope, and wondered how history would judge this moment. Would it be remembered as an opportunity seized, or as one of those tragic turning points where courage faltered? In the corner of the room, a single chair remained slightly pushed out, abandoned in the rush when the meeting adjourned. He imagined the person who had sat there someone who had almost spoken, almost tipped the balance with one sentence, but instead had swallowed their words. Politics was filled with those moments, not just the things said, but the things left unsaid. And in those silences, entire futures could be lost. He rose slowly, slipping his jacket over his shoulders. His Secret Service detail waited outside the door, but for a few moments he wanted solitude. The hallway was dim, lit by the soft yellow glow of antique sconces. As he walked, the quiet seemed to thicken, wrapping around him. His mind returned, again and again, to one particular phrase from the meeting, an idea proposed, then swiftly buried. If only they had been willing to take that risk. In his private study, Obama sat down in the leather chair that had become his sanctuary over the years. The lamp beside him cast a warm pool of light on the desk, highlighting a stack of historical bibles. He reached for one without thinking, flipping through the pages until he found a chapter on moments when a single decision had shifted the fate of nations. Reading about past leaders, he felt the familiar mix of admiration and frustration. Admiration for their bravery, frustration for the times when fear had made them retreat. His phone buzzed softly. It was a message from an old confidant who had also been in the meeting. "We're not done yet. History isn't finished writing this chapter." Obama stared at the words for a long moment, then allowed himself the faintest smile. That night, sleep came slowly. When it finally did, it was restless, filled with vivid dreams of alternate timelines, versions of the world where the decision had gone differently. He saw people walking freely where there were now walls, heard laughter where there was now silence, and felt the sharp ache of knowing those visions were only dreams. For now, morning brought a pale gray light. Over breakfast, he reviewed his notes from yesterday, circling phrases, underlining thoughts, building the skeleton of a plan. The failure of the meeting didn't have to be the end. It could be the spark for something else, something quieter but more enduring. He would reach out to certain people privately, away from the glare of cameras and the noise of politics. Sometimes the most important movements began not in grand chambers, but in whispered conversations. Later that day, he walked through the streets incognito, wearing a simple cap and jacket. He watched people's students laughing on their way to class, a shopkeeper sweeping his doorway, an elderly man feeding pigeons in the park. These were the faces that had been on his mind in that meeting. They would never know how close things had come, how fragile their everyday lives could be in the hands of a few. And maybe they didn't need to know, not yet. In the evening, he returned to the same table where the meeting had taken place. This time it was empty except for him and the quiet ticking of a wall clock. He pulled out a blank sheet of paper and began writing. Not a speech, not legislation, but a letter to the future. A record of what happened here, so that one day, when the time was right, the truth would not be lost. His pen moved steadily, the words coming with surprising clarity. And with each sentence, the burden on his chest lightened just a little. He knew change might not come tomorrow, or even in his lifetime, but the seed had been planted, and history had a way of nurturing seeds in the most unexpected soil. When he finished, he folded the letter and locked it in a drawer. Then he looked out the window at the rain-slicked streets, the city lights shimmering. In the puddles, somewhere out there, the future was waiting, shaped not just by the decisions made in public, but by the ones forged in the quiet resolve of a single human heart. And as the night deepened, Barack Obama whispered to himself, almost like a prayer, "We're not done yet."